Hello, this is the second episode of Composers in Conversation, and I'm delighted to welcome my guest, who is Dr. Katharine Parton, and she is my current October 2022 Guest Composer of the Month. And Katharine is a composer of choral and orchestral music, and she's also a conductor and researcher with special interests in the experiences of women in music and those with disabilities. And Katharine was a By Fellow and Director of Music at Fitzwilliam College, Cambridge from 2014 to 17. And I believe you're currently at the University of Melbourne.
I completed my PhD at the University of Melbourne, and now I'm freelance.
Right, so as a composer and conductor, I guess.
Yes, and with a very new baby, so not doing a lot of either of those just right now, but in the next few months I will be.
And I first encountered your music with your absolutely fabulous Gaudebat et Ridebat, which I found really appealing because it's very sparky and lively. It has this strong driving rhythm, but also this spare and contrapuntal texture that makes it stand out from a lot of the music that's been written at the moment. So I found that really appealing. So to kick off, I wondered if you might tell us a little bit about Gaudebat et Ridebat, please.
Oh, thank you. That's very kind. So I wrote Gaudebat when I was at Fitzwilliam College, when I was director of music there. We had every year, tomorrow will be my dancing day, was everyone's, as it should be, everyone's favorite. And we had a couple of percussionists in the college who were also in the choir, and we wanted more of what I think is now called a bit of a bop. That's what I was aiming for. And so I, with not very much notice, the first version of that, I pulled it together so that we kind of could justify having brought percussion into the chapel, basically, with a wonderful chaplain who was very supportive of lively music. So that was where it kind of started. And I refined it after that. I have to say that there were a few corners there which were not as singable as they could have been. And I lent more into the experience of pregnancy and the physicality of what Mary would have experienced coming up to the birth of Jesus. And that's always something, since I've had children, something that resonates in a very different way. And probably, I don't think you have to have had children, you just have to maybe be a bit grown up and be a bit more thoughtful about it than I was as a child when I first, obviously most of us first encountered that Christmas story. And it was weighing on me, this kind of, how would that feel when you are that pregnant and you are on a donkey and you are just, I can't imagine anything worse. And so what I tried to put into that was that physical feeling of uncertainty, the kind of the gait of moving from side to side being an effort, and the pain, and then the emotional uncertainty of what was going to happen, that's associated not just with the birth of Christ, but with any birth and with any mother, any parent even. So that's what I tried to put into it, and I'm so thrilled when people enjoy it, because it was the first piece that kind of went out into the wider world, and I'm so grateful that people like it.
So full of energy and joy, but there's also a more lyrical side to your style. So I've been listening to your music, and I find very appealing your string compositions, which have these intriguing French titles, Le Temps, and was it Le Jour des Adieux? And
Yes.
Really enjoyed them. I wonder if you could perhaps just shed a little light on those.
Oh, thank you. You're so kind. So the Tang, which I've got on YouTube on my website via YouTube, played by Fenella Humphreys, which was just, I asked her to record it for me for something else, for a submission, and then she liked it, and she was so kind about it, and she recorded it again for her own YouTube. And then she re-recorded it recently. She got funding to re-record some of those pieces that she'd put on YouTube during lockdowns. And can't tell you how thrilled I am that somebody like Vanilla Humphreys thinks my writing for violin is good enough to play. So Le Tang is a piece. When I was first diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, we spent a lot of time in France and spent long summers in France. And because I couldn't walk, we would drive a lot, which is obviously terrible for the environment, but it was a while ago now, and we made the decisions that we made. But we would, rather than going for a walk, we would go for a drive. And in the part of France that we were in the Charente, there's these little ponds. They're called the Tang, and or les Tang, and they are shady, and they have plants growing around them, and there's always birds at different times of day, different birds, and they're ubiquitous. And we drove past them, and I must have seen hundreds over years of being there at summer. And I wanted to capture that kind of micro moment. I was also a little bit influenced. There's I think, South Korean photographer called Ahai, I think it's pronounced, who had an exhibition in Paris at the Orangery, I think it was, and again at Versailles, I think. And he took something like 50,000 photos, and then had this big exhibition of these little micro moments of birds landing on the water, of just these tiny, tiny moments. And it was that sort of thing that I was trying to capture in Le Tang. And the other part of what I was trying to do in Le Tang, and which things that I have managed to do, is write something which was enjoyable to play and which was physically enjoyable for the violinist. I think for me, that's really important, that whether it's for singers or instrumentalists, that a piece is comfortable to play, not necessarily easy, and not necessarily without challenge or complexity, or technical complexity or technical challenge, but is satisfying in a particular way. We all know on our instruments there are particular keys that fit better. There are particular double stops that just, when you hit it, it's just so good. And there are others which you can work on forever, and it's just never going to be quite right. And there are notes on the clarinet which just, it's not the best notes. So that's kind of what I was really leaning into with Le Tang. And then Le Jour des Adieux, which the quote comes from a song by Fauré about, it's called The Cradle, and it's about fishermen leaving village behind, leaving the mothers and the babies behind, basically, and going out into the storm and into the world and the danger and the sadness and so on. And that's where the quote comes from, that the title, Le Jour des Adieux, the day of goodbyes. And I wrote it, I was asked to write it by another violinist, Hannah Roper, who is in Herefordshire, and she was putting together very quickly a charity concert to raise money for Ukrainian refugees. And it just sort of, the title and the idea came together at once. And that one, I think, is not quite as physically comfortable. I've got a few little stretches in there which are perfectly fine and perfectly playable, but which didn't quite satisfy me. I think if I had a little bit longer, I would have been looking for a way to tweak that. I might go back to it and have another look, but I really enjoy writing for strings. I think they're not my instrument, but it's very satisfying when you get it right.
But this idea that maybe Le Jour des Adieux was slightly less comfortable, perhaps that's appropriate, because if you're referring to saying goodbye, you don't know if you're going to see the person again, and so perhaps that sort of tension in there is artistically appropriate. But it seems to me, from what you were saying about Le Tang, is that you're very concerned about inclusiveness. That chimes in very well with another video about your work at Fitzwilliam, where you were running a conducting workshop for state school girls between the age of 12 and 15. And I thought this was absolutely glorious to give this opportunity and essentially to give people a chance to shine in something that perhaps they wouldn't otherwise get the opportunity or the encouragement to do. So could you perhaps tell me a little bit more about that event?
So Alice Farnham had been running her women conducting workshops for quite a while. And I was lucky enough to meet her and said to her, I talked to her, we had dinner and at college, and I talked to her about, she'd come to Cambridge to run one of her workshops, which I'd been able to sit in on. So I'd sort of got an idea of what she was doing. And I had said quite boldly to her that I thought her workshops were too late in the game, because the students that I was getting who were coming to me were already saying, oh no, I've never done that. And he's done, quite a bit, so I won't put myself forward. And I was saying that we need to do a younger age group. And she said to me, well, why don't you do that then? And I thought, well, why don't I? And so we did. I mean, it didn't just happen the next day. It was a lot of organising, but we ran a series of workshops for girls and non-binary young people between, I think it was 11 and 15 or 12 and 15. And they were an absolute highlight of my time in Cambridge. They were so much fun. We did a one day, we did a sort of shortened version, and Alma Sheehan, who worked with Alice, came and did a lot of the physicality and drama kind of side of things with me. But I just absolutely love teaching, conducting. My PhD's on conducting and gesture, and I've worked now with everyone from 7 or 8 year old kids up to professional conductors in terms of coaching, and they all need such different things, but it is so rewarding and so exciting to be able to give somebody the tools to communicate better in a musical situation. And with those girls in particular, they came from all over Cambridgeshire and quite far beyond, and they were so transformed. At the start of the day, obviously they were nervous and they would have relaxed anyway, whatever we were doing, I'm sure. But they all, once they sort of got up there, and they all got to participate, some with the ensemble of professionals and some in different situations with the group. But they all, you could see it in their faces, this moment when they realized that they were changing the sound. They were making that happen. And I think that's so incredibly important, and then all of those young people will have gone off, and if somebody says to them, well, why don't you have a go conducting, they don't get to say, oh, I never have. Now they have. And I hope very much that they have all gone on and at least felt confident enough to say, I'll give it a go if I want to. Like, they don't have to, but I hope that it's taken away that moment of, oh no, I've never done that, so I won't. But there's so many people now working in that space to give young women and non-binary young people the opportunity to have a go at these things before that kind of university age. But was very lucky to be in a position where I could put something like that together for that age group at that time when there wasn't very much going on.
I think that's absolutely fantastic. And I think it could be so transformative when somebody's given agency and the chance to initiate something and to control something, and to find that they can do all sorts of things that they never dreamed were possible before. So yeah. I was very moved by that. And I only wish that society was like that 30 or 40 years ago when I was, I'll tell you how old I am, but you know what I mean. But talking about conducting, I looked into some research that you presented at a conference in Sydney in 2009. I thought this was fascinating.
Gosh, it's a long time ago. Which one was that?
I can't remember the name of the conference. It was International Conducting Music something Society.
Something.
Convention thereof, and it happened on the 30th of December 2000 in Sydney. But this intrigued me because I kind of came into composition from a sideways route, because I started off as a kind of hybrid historical musicologist and analyst, and while analysing other people's music, I came to understand the language and began to compose my own music.
And such a good way in.
But what you're doing is not so much analysing music as analysing the people who direct the performance of music. So it's a kind of meta analysis, and I found this really intriguing. So I would like you, if you don't mind, to tell us more about this, please.
So my PhD research was on, I started out, so I did a master's degree and looked at conductor gesture. And I was looking literally at the kind of the hands, and then in part of it, analysing just the hand gestures, the manual gestures, and then the other part, I was looking at measuring quantitatively the impact that the arms in different parts of the conductor's kind of space, the portrait space there, the impact that had on musician action. There was half of it was looking at the lag between when the beat happened and when they played in a start of a piece, and the other was looking at whether they could create a difference in the dynamic that the musicians were playing at. There was a crescendo that they were supposed to be doing, that the conductor was supposed to indicate. That was with a student, like master's student, conducting students. And I kind of completed the quantitative stuff and moved on. So I was like, that's very difficult and time consuming and not very rewarding for someone else. It's good fun for someone else. But so then when I did my PhD, I already had realized through that master's that looking at the conductor alone was not enough. That was very much what I thought. I was a conductor, so I thought you're only the conductor. That's what needs to be looked at. But I realized very, very quickly that actually this is an interaction and we need to look at it interactionally, and I need to unpack what's happening across everybody in the orchestra. And then because it's a PhD, not a career's worth of analysis or several careers worth of analysis, that kind of came back down again. And it was the conductor to several key people, and the first violins was one particular group I looked at, but also lots of wind players and all the leaders, that kind of thing. So basically what I did was use tools from linguistics and from sociology to try to understand, or try to explain rather, how the communication was happening between the conductor and the orchestra in rehearsal. And in one particular rehearsal cycle with a professional orchestra and a professional conductor. And the kind of key things that came out of that, I'm probably going to forget all the key things now, but the key things were that a lot of what's happening is about taking positions on things. So that the conductor is taking a position, taking a stance is the technical term, taking a stance on what the musicians have just done and providing them with kind of quote unquote feedback in order to modify what they're doing to do something else. But that the musicians are equally giving that back to the conductor, that they're saying, okay, we accept your sort of what you're doing, what you're asking for, and this is how we're interpreting what you're doing. And then went into a lot more detail in terms of how cognition was shared over the conductor and the orchestra, and looking at particular types of things, like how they negotiated things like knowledge and where knowledge comes from in the orchestral rehearsal room, who has knowledge and who has to kind of mark where their knowledge has come from. And there was one thing which I found really interesting, which I think has really transformed the way I rehearse a lot of the time, which is that musicians, whether they're singers or playing, actually, they have a physical experience of the music that is different to what the conductor has. And the conductor has the hearing privilege, to use not a word I used in the thesis, but to kind of use a more modern word, has the kind of, is in that privileged position of hearing everything the way that it's supposed to go out to the audience. But then they don't have that position in the ensemble. They don't feel it, and they don't perceive it in the way that the ensemble players or singers perceive it. And so when musicians say something like, it seems to me, or when we play it, it feels like, that's a really important kind of, it's not a challenge to the conductor, it's using a different type of knowledge which is happening, which the conductor doesn't have access to. And basically there's a very long chapter about the intricacies of that. And then I talk a lot about chairs and the importance of chairs in orchestral rehearsal and what they mean interactionally. But yeah, it basically tries to unpack how that interaction happens. And I think a lot of it is intuitively known by musicians. but it's not something that was previously explained or unpacked in that particular way. And then because I was used to looking at conductor gesture through these linguistic lenses, which was a learning curve for me, I've been fortunate enough to be able to share some of the other things that came out of that thesis in terms of how to make one's gesture clearer, or how to pack more meaning into it, and how to get rid of things that don't mean anything or that are detracting from your meaning or acting against what you actually intend. I've been really fortunate to be able to present that work to emerging professional conductors through conferences, but also through professional development put on by like the Tasmanian Symphony Orchestra and people like that, which has been really wonderful to be able to sort of share it with the people to whom it's going to make the most difference. So
thank you so much for looking all of that. I mean, just one small question, because you're involved in both orchestral and choral conducting. Would you say that there is a big difference between those two disciplines?
So I think there is both a massive difference and no difference at all. I've been asked this a few times. So I think in terms of the importance of your musicianship, there's no difference. There's no kind of one is harder, the other is harder, not at all. They require different skills. And I think to become a choral conductor without having trained as a singer is not something I would recommend. I think you need to have an understanding of the voice. But equally, to be an orchestral conductor without having been an orchestral musician, even as a student, to me that feels like you've got to find another way to get to know those instruments. You've got to find another way to understand the orchestra and another way to understand singers and choral ensembles. So that's one side of it. On the other, so sort of a three-sided figure that I'm talking about here. On another side, the rehearsal technique is very, very different. And the repertoire is very different. The needs in rehearsal are very different. Those to me are two separate skill sets, and I don't think there's a lot of overlap a lot of the time. And somebody who is an excellent orchestral conductor can sometimes really come unstuck trying to rehearse. They might be fine in a concert if they're sort of jumping into someone, but it's that rehearsal where you really see that it's a different skill set. And I think gesturally, they're very, very similar. They can be very, very similar, I should say. There's a lot of, I don't think you need to learn a different set of techniques or a different set of gestures or a different way of doing that. But I think there are some areas of choral work which are a bit more specialized, like psalm singing. If you were to conduct psalm singing, the best I've seen sort of almost don't conduct. They just sort of encourage. And I think you do see that sometimes in some parts of orchestral music, but not as a routine, this is a whole genre where we kind of aim for this hands-off approach, if that makes sense. So I think, yeah, they are, I think the people who can do both really, really well, that they are usually people who have experienced both in some way, or they're just fantastically great musicians who are just, gonna, everything they touch is gonna turn to gold. So, but yeah, I think the experience is the key thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think you wrote about, a key difference, but I think things are changing because, traditionally, choral conductors, at least in church music, have been organists, and they're coming from a keyboard point of view. So what they're expecting to hear will be the same as what they play on or the organ, which evokes a lot of interesting questions about temperament, because the third on the piano is very different from a well-tuned just third that's a good choir.
Yeah.
The difference and so on. But there's also this kind of emotional and physical element to it, because if you're playing a keyboard or you're playing many other kinds of instruments, all you have to do is press the right key at the right time and you get the sound that you require. Whereas for people, when we sing, it is so different.
The vulnerability, I think, for singers that you have to acknowledge as a conductor, whatever background you come from, you have to be there to support singers because it is a vulnerable thing to do. And I think I mean, I feel vulnerable if I have to sing in front of a group of people something that I don't know very well or I don't feel very confident about. In a way that I don't with an instrument between me and what's happening. I think there's a definite vulnerability there, and I think you can really tell. And I'm thinking back to organ trials at Cambridge, where I don't think I've ever seen so many organists in a short period of time. Not an organist myself, so that was a new thing for me. But you can really tell which of those organists were choristers either before they became organists as sort of younger children or alongside, especially for some of the girls who had been older choristers but organists as well. You can really tell immediately when they get in front of a group who has that experience and who doesn't. And I think it is very different. And I think we have to all, as composers as well, acknowledge that when we write something and think, is this going to just be terrifying? And if it is it worth it? And I think that's where I got to that kind of point of thinking through actually some advice about orchestral writing, which was, if you've got something in there that's going to be difficult to play, is it actually going to come through the texture? Is it needlessly difficult? And are you obscuring it? And that was like a sort of an undergraduate piece of advice a long time ago. But that same idea, I think, comes through. Are we making this difficult for somebody for not a good enough reason? And I think that's really important for composers, especially composers who may not be singers, to really think about, what would this feel like to sing? Maybe I can do it at home and it's fine, it's not that hard. But if it is hard, and that's where I think workshops, especially if you're not a singer, you haven't been a choral conductor, workshopping your music and really listening to those singers and listening between the lines as well, that they say, oh no, that's awkward, and you can see it, and singers will tell you, they will absolutely tell you that is, I mean, as you know, they will not hide if something is awkward and unpleasant and makes them feel nervous. If you're paying attention, it's very obvious where those corners are.
I like this comment about listening between the lines. And I mean, this ties in with something that I teach to my own students. Is recently I was teaching orchestration, and one of the things I try to stress is that you cannot, of course, play all of the instruments in the orchestra unless you're, just absolutely amazing. But most people
have a lot of time.
Well, so what everybody can do is that they can at least arrange to have a go on an instrument and get to know how it feels to play it, and just to get really basic techniques. So, for example, when I was small, I had a few violin lessons, and I've never forgotten that. And so when I write for violin, I can still picture and make a mental impression of how it feels to play what I'm writing. I find that so helpful. And again, I play the flute extremely badly, but again, this gives me some insight into how to write for the flute. You don't need to be able to play to anything approaching a publicly consumable level.
That's a very nice way of putting it. I like that.
The ability to imagine what it's like to play, and that can transform your ability to orchestrate, simply being able to form some sort of relationship with the instrument. And again, it's business about making things as easy as is possible to play. So as difficult as they need to be, but no more, but as easy as possible, and within an appropriate tessitura, because voices and instruments will always sound best when they're within their comfortable limits. And if you go into the do not exceed area, then there can be excitement and tension if the composer or the orchestrator or the arranger knows what they're doing, but all too often it's just going to put people into a vulnerable state and can be inviting trouble. We were talking about the differences and the similarities between choral conducting and orchestral conducting. And now I'd just like to shift gears a little bit and return to the subject of the experience of women in music. And I was reading a blog you wrote for the Minerva Festival in Cambridge a few years ago about the difference in attitude that still obtains towards the experiences of women musicians who are mothers and men musicians who are fathers. But you don't only highlight the problem, but you also point towards some steps towards potential solutions. And I wondered if you could kindly say a few more words about that, please.
Um, so I wrote a blog post which was for the Minerva Festival in Cambridge, as you say, and I actually wrote it while I had at the time a very young baby, and I wrote it on my phone. I remember in the notes app with one hand actually because I was feeding the baby, and that's when I wrote the blog post. It felt like a really kind of like I was living the experience as I did it. And so the key thing I think there were two things, the two sort of branches of things that can be done. There were organizational things that can happen, and there were things that individual audience members basically can do. And in terms of organization, there's a couple of key things that actually apply to composers as well. SWAPRA are doing amazing work in opera in terms of getting scheduling happening in advance so that people can organize childcare, which sounds like such a ridiculous thing that there need to be somebody being activists about that. But they are doing amazing work there and have, I believe, really made big inroads into that industry. And so scheduling, I think a lot of groups will ask me to come and do something, and I'll say, well, I can't do it at short notice, or I can't do it in the evenings. And there needs to be we need to think about people who are parents, and it's not just mothers, but as you say, it does affect women differently, and we're talking about things piling on in different ways. So scheduling is a big thing. Being openly welcome. I went to the first, I have been to, I don't know how many conferences in my research career. It must be 30 or 40 minimum where I've been presenting. But I went to one just before the pandemic. It was a conference on gender and music. And it was the first one that I'd been to, unbelievably, in all those years, the first one where they had actually sent information and on the website in advance saying, we welcome your children. We welcome breastfeeding mothers. We welcome people who bring their children with them. It ran over a weekend as well. And I took a child with me. And I felt so safe doing that. And it was the first time I'd taken children to conferences before, but that hasn't always been welcoming. So I think if your event, if your concert, if your workshop, whatever it is welcoming of children, please say that, because so many places aren't, and so many places aren't welcoming even of breastfeeding mothers. And so many places don't have facilities and just don't have the right attitude. If you do have that, please share that information with people who have kids. And I think in terms of going back to working with individuals, flexibility is really important. When I worked with the Tasmanian Symphony Orchestra, they were amazing in terms of letting me book my own travel and things like that, so that I could book for my children as well, which I pay for myself, but because I couldn't leave them for that long and so on. But they were just so understanding, and that goes for people with all sorts of access needs, actually, not just parents. And then I think the other sort of thing that for composers more than conductors or more than performers perhaps is residencies, and that is an area that there is still much to do in. There are so few residencies. In fact, I'm not sure I can think of any composing ones, and maybe you're aware of some, but maybe some listeners will know of some. But most composition focused residencies either actively say we do not allow family, children, partners, or they have rules like, once you're here, you have to stay, you must be here full time, things like that. And it's so off-putting to anybody with small children, but particularly, I think, mothers, that I can't apply for that then, can I? Because I can't leave my children for a month or 2 weeks or however long this residency is for. I can't bring them because the facilities are not suitable, because they're explicitly banned. And I understand that sometimes there are good reasons. If it's a shared space, there might be concerns about that, and I can understand the kind of logic, but I think a lot of it comes from, oh, we've never had children, so we've never tried to see what would happen. And I think I am definitely not alone in saying that that is a massive problem for composers, because those residencies then lead to other things, not just what you produce in the residency, but then when you apply for the next thing, you can list that residency at the end. I'm sort of, you know, talking to the choir here, but it really frustrates me, the residency thing at the moment. And then there's all the things that audience members or ensemble members can do and say, well, can we have a program that includes a more inclusive, diverse range of people, not just women, people of color, people from different socioeconomic backgrounds, people with disabilities, all sorts of people should be represented. And I think people should say, well, this program that we're doing for this concert, it's all white men. And sometimes conductors come back and say, oh yes, that's because we're doing, you know, music of the 17th century. Like, there weren't women writing music then. And it's a little bit harder, but I think it's on everybody to say, well, hang on, could we not find one? Or could we not, there's a commission I'm just sent off recently, which was in response to an older work. And it's got a sort of a mix of composers writing things in response. Consider doing something like that. If nothing else, there must be something which complements, which you have in the choir repertoire, in the library, which complements the rest of the program, that you're, as a kind of overture moment almost, to come into it. And then you can do your big evening of Rachmaninoff or whoever you're doing. I don't know why I'm picking on Rachmaninoff. I love Rachmaninoff, but I think it is really important for everybody in an ensemble to feel like they should say, hang on, this is not diverse, this is not inclusive. Can we put something else in? And I think it is easier when you've got a suggestion, because often people will come back and say, well, I've done all this work playing this concert, what do you suggest? And if you can say, well, actually, what about this? Oh, okay, well, yeah, maybe. Then it's at least a seed that's planted. And so I try not to go to concerts. I've had a rule now for about 4 or 5 years. I won't go to a concert unless it features not just white men in some way. And that can be in the performers. It doesn't have to be the composers. But actually, if you stick to that rule, it's funny how you sort of think, surely that's lots of concerts. And now it is lots of concerts. But 5 years ago, it wasn't that many concerts. I was really kind of going, oh, that's annoying. So I wanted to go and see whoever that was. But, you know, so what I do and what I would encourage everyone to do, and what that blog kind of, I'm pretty sure what that blog suggests, is that we kind of use our power as audience members and say, I'm not going to buy the ticket for that. I'm not going to turn up and be a body in that one. I'm going to take my audience member power somewhere else. Not just boycotting. It's not boycotting. It's saying, I choose to buy the product that is more inclusive.
Yeah,
I think the blog was much more concise. Read the blog.
yeah. I mean, it sometimes feels as if we're taking 2 steps forward and 1 step back, because, I mean, if you're planning a repertory, it is tempting as a choral director just to stick with what is familiar and what is already known and what is easy. But the thing is,
what's practical, let's be honest, it's, you know, there's a big practical element a lot of the time when you've got limited time and uncertain time at the moment. And I have a lot of sympathy. It's nobody, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's not so much malice, so much as simply, you know, being under pressure to do a job and then having to make decisions quickly. But the thing is, all we're asking for is a small amount of effort, and yet that small amount of effort can vastly expand the repertoire, can vastly expand people's ranges of experience. And the thing is, I think Bach and Handel and Beethoven, they're always going to be secure in their place in music history, but by giving recognition and offering acknowledgement to a much more diverse range of composers and repertory.
Mm.
It doesn't diminish the others, it
Mm.
simply expands the world and offers an experience that is just much richer and better than it was before.
Mm.
It only requires a small amount of effort. And the thing is, it is getting easier. So thanks, in particular, I think, to such initiatives as Multitude of Voices, because
Mm.
in the past, if you want to say, well, you know, why can't we have music by, say, a non-binary or a woman composer? Then the standard response was, "Oh, I don't know any." But now you can say, well, here's a whole bunch of music, and excellent
Yeah.
music at that. And I think that has made a major difference because it's now all in one place, and the range of styles and
It's huge.
range
Yeah.
of sounds and approaches is absolutely phenomenal, and it's a tremendous resource. And you know, without wishing to sound big-headed, but we're both on it, and
Yeah.
you know, it's really exciting to be part of that project. And I think a lot of thanks is due to Louise Stewart for her
Mm.
initiative in getting us started. And I think it is having a kind of snowballing effect as well, because we're seeing more calls for scores for women composers, composers of diverse backgrounds. And I think this is showing that the classical music world can be much bigger, much richer.
Mm.
And I
I
just
think Louise has made such a big difference. Louise, with that initiative, Louise Stewart has made, look, she's actually changed music.
yeah,
She's changed the future, because it's not just the choirs that will now program those pieces. And as a conductor, oh my goodness, to have that set, to know that I'll be able to find something in there, not have to then spend a week looking for something. That is just, it's amazing. But all those younger people who are singing, all those choristers, all those
mm,
choir members who are going to grow up just thinking, we sing music by women, we sing music by non-binary people, we sing music by people who come from the same culture as me, who come from a different culture to me. That's just what we do. Can you imagine? I mean, I didn't do anything by a woman until I was at university, third year at that. And I must have sung things by women before then, I think, in educational circumstances, but I didn't play anything by a woman till third year of university. And I'm so envious of this generation that's coming up. But Louise Stewart has, I think you're right, she has really made a massive contribution there that just, I mean, I've got so much admiration for her pulling all that together and doing all that. And the team that she had with her, Olivia, doing the typesetting and the editing. And so it's such a privilege. I was so thrilled to be included in that. And especially when I saw all the other pieces, I was like, oh my goodness, all these amazing composers and the lobby. But yeah, no, a really wonderful initiative. And I think if we have more, if that's the way that we go in the future, and there's more like that, then I think things look good.
yeah, I agree. I mean, I think there will be turbulence because all social progress is never a straight line, but
No.
there are bumps in the road. But I think the young people especially, you know, I've got a lot of hope in the young people because I meet young people and they're so open-minded, they're so accepting, and they're so willing to view the world differently. And as I say, it only takes a small amount of effort.
Mm.
And the thing is, by acknowledging people, by giving rights, by including people, you do not diminish what has gone before, you make it better. You make everyone better. You make the world better for everyone. And I think, you know, we are broadly heading in the right direction, but there will be turbulence along the way. But, you know, I do feel positive. And it's a strange thing because I sometimes wish that I could be younger and I could wish that I could have my life and not have to face up to certain challenges that I've had to face. But at the same time, I'm sort of proud to be part of Multitude of Voices and to be part of a generation that is changing things and making a better world for those that will come after us. Okay, so that's pretty heavy. So now I need to kind of take a bit of a detour now and talk a bit more about the compositional process, because earlier on you were saying about Gardebat, Ridebat, that you wrote a kind of preliminary version and then another version, and then you were tweaking it and changing it, and that chimes with me because I absolutely hate to let go of a piece of music. I come up with the draft, and then I write and I rewrite and I rewrite. I love that process. I just love that. It's like a potter where you have a piece of clay and then you're turning it into the finished product, and it's so hard to let go and it's so enjoyable. But I suspect your compositional process then will be somewhat similar to mine.
I actually, the potter thing, I immediately thought, I think it's more like sculpture. To me, it feels like I'm chipping away. The
Right.
sculpture's already under there. I just have to chip away and find it. That's honestly how I see it. But I love that we both got this kind of very physical, hands-on art kind of approach to it, because I genuinely feel that my biggest fear is that I've written something that I've just done a melodic dictation, because it feels, when it's right, and so far, touch wood, cross fingers, I haven't, but it feels like when you've chipped away, it already was there, and you've just found where it's all like a puzzle, where the puzzle pieces were always going to go in that spot. It just took me a draft or 2 drafts or 6 drafts or however many drafts to get the puzzle to that spot, but it was always going to go there. I just didn't know. And that's how I feel like I'm uncovering the piece, which it didn't exist. There's nothing to uncover, but it just, it feels very much like that kind of creation of something, a physical creation. I agree.
So you like Michelangelo, who's releasing the sculpture that already exists.
Yes, that idea, but maybe not quite at that level just yet. But yes, that's the idea: releasing something, finding it, kind of clear, almost an archaeological kind of clearing away the dust.
I don't know about you, but I mean, I often find that I have some ideas that come quickly, and then other things that I really have to work at. But it's like a lot of composition is a struggle, but then there's a kind of moment when suddenly a kind of solution flashes through the mind. It's like you're driving along to somewhere. Sorry, not very environmentally friendly, but say you're driving and then suddenly a landscape comes into view and you suddenly see it all in one go. And then you can kind of drive towards that to release that landscape from the enormous block.
To release the landscape from the potter's wheel, as it makes perfect sense.
Okay, yeah. So, but I think perhaps for non-composers, it might be. I mean, the thing is, the popular image of a composer is some crazy person who is kind of wildly in a furious transport of inspiration, scribbling down this heavenly music that they're hearing. But the reality is that it does require a combination of inspiration that definitely is there, but there's also the perspiration and that patiently chipping away at the block of marble and trusting that you're going to see the shape and that it's going to come. And then also I think there's sort of knowing when it's time to put down your tools, because if you just put one more chip, the whole thing's going to come apart.
Yes, I think I have definitely overchipped sometimes and then gone, oh no, undo, because it's always once I get into the putting it onto the computer, that's where I think it's very easy to then overchip, as it were. But luckily there is that undo, and you can go back to the previous saved version and realize that's, I didn't need to do that. I could go back. Fortunately, I think it would be very difficult to be doing all of it by hand all of the time. I'm glad I'm not living in those times.
There are just a couple more things that I would love to ask you about, if I may.
Sure, absolutely.
You composed a piece for Sorry, I'm having a post-Covidius moment there. You composed a piece for the 2015 St Andrews Festival called The Flood. Now, there's only a small excerpt of that available on YouTube. So I would love to hear the entire piece, but I found it really intriguing because it has these really curious dark sonorities and also these kind of vocal sound effects, these kind of things. And I found this piece really interesting because it's quite a sharp stylistic contrast from Gaudebat et Ridebat or from Le Tang and the other pieces. But this shows that you're a very multi-dimensional composer. And I wondered if you'd please elaborate a little bit more about The Flood.
To me, that's fascinating that it feels very sort of contrastive, because to me it feels very similar. With Le Tang, what I did actually was I wrote one phrase and then I reversed that phrase for the next phrase. And then I wrote a second phrase and then reversed it. So that's 4 phrases. 4 phrases. I've just held up 10 fingers. So it was a reflection on the pond. That was the kind of. So if you listen again, well, you don't have to listen again, but if anyone listens to it, it is each phrase reflects the one before, and then there's a new pair, so it comes in pairs. And with Floods, I was doing what I feel is a very similar thing. I was taking a chord that was voiced in a particular way, and then I was making everybody move with the gliss to the same chord, which was just voiced in a very different way. And the gliss, it says in the score that everybody should move at their own pace, and they can start as soon as they like from one chord. They just must get to the next chord at the end of, I think it's a semi-brief sort of, it's quite a long time, but some people can move really quickly and some move very, very slowly, but it's exactly the same chord, just revoiced, but it sounds quite different. And what I like about it is that the way through that semi-brief, you get every kind of, it's like I don't know how to describe it, but it was, the idea was, it was like water kind of washing over it and the light glistening through the water, and it's still just that same bit of water, but it looks different from every different angle and every different ripple and every different way that the light refracts, highlights something different. And so to me, that's quite funny, because I was trying to do very much the same thing, which was looking at one thing from 2 different angles. That piece does have some use of sibilance to kind of create that sound of the waves on the sand, or like a rocky beach, that kind of sound. So yeah, that's really fascinating, because it's how wonderful that they come across so differently. That's really pleasing that I've used the same idea, what seemed like the same idea, in different enough ways that they seem attractive. I'm thrilled.
It reminds me of a couple of things. I mean, it's a very systematic approach, this idea of producing an idea and then retrograding it. So, I mean, I'm fascinated with composers who apply these systematic approaches. So everyone from my idol, Josquin de Pré, through to Arvo Part. But apart from that, what you were saying also about that, the approach, this sort of like a quasi-aleatory, where you have different people doing the same thing but in slightly different times at their own speed. That reminded me of a piece that Sarah MacDonald was telling me about, that she had composed, where she had created a kind of 40-part counterpoint by having the same line, I think she said, but the singers were singing at slightly different tempi to give this kind of susurrating.
Yes. Is this the one she did that was designed to be sung over Zoom? Was it that one?
She was telling me about this back in February, I think so. My memory's got a bit hazy, but it sounds very much like it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She's a hero of mine. I was very impressed with myself getting to work alongside her in Cambridge. It was one of those moments where you go, wow. I think she's so clever in the way she composes things. I think sometimes I think I overcomplicate things, and I haven't been composing as long as many people. most people probably. And I think I sometimes still make that kind of trying to put too many ideas into one. And I think Sarah's work is just so impressive. It's so, I don't know how to describe it, but it's just so clever. That's what I really like about it. It's so clever when you look at it, but it loses none of that wonderful musicianship for its cleverness. It's not that kind of clever in your face kind of thing. It's just so, when you start to tease it apart, you go, wow, the craftsmanship on this. It's like, this is doesn't sound terrible, but you know when you pull the drawers out of a really nice piece of carpentry, like a really nice cupboard, or not cupboard, doesn't have drawers, you know what I mean, sideboard, and you pull it out, and the drawers themselves, the inside that no one sees, is just beautifully crafted. Or I mean, you go into any church or cathedral and there'll be somewhere around a corner or somewhere up that no one's really looking, but somebody's just used such good craftsmanship, and I just admire Sarah's work for that, and the fact that on top of that it's fantastically musical and wonderful to sing, and I think she's amazing. What was the original question? I've just gone off on a tangent about how great Sarah McDonald is.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's this balance of simplicity and complexity, because very often the solution to a compositional problem will turn out to be to simplify, to get to the core idea. But at the same time, you mustn't shirk away from making things as complex and as difficult as they need to be.
They need to be.
No more. So it's Tang was saying earlier about sometimes you need to write to a certain level of difficulty, but no more. It has to be just right.
I like that Stravinsky quote. I can't remember the exact words, but it's something about putting barriers around or boundaries around what you're doing, and then you can be more creative inside. That really resonates with me. That a lot of pieces that I write, in fact, if not almost all of them, have some kind of, have to be for this combination of singers and instruments, or I've got this idea about this way I'm going to do it. I'm going to do these reflections, or that really helps me stay within, because there's so much possibility. So I really like to set up a strict little set of boundaries around what I'm doing, or be writing for something which has those boundaries put in it, because it's a commission for a particular group about a particular thing. I think that's really, really helpful and incredibly helpful. I don't think I do my best work when I could write anything at all. In fact, I don't do any work when I could write anything at all. I just sit there going, well, what should I do? So I have to make them for myself. I think a lot of people find that, though.
This idea of creative restrictions. So, I mean, I practice it myself, but very often what I find is that when I get into a cul-de-sac, the solution is just to allow in just a little bit of fantasy. So if you have too much fantasy, you just get a rhapsodic kind of form that goes nowhere. But just a little can just add that element of mystery and unpredictability that then transforms the piece. Right, I'm going to have to wrap things up because I'm getting the 10-minute warning from Zoom. But just a couple of more things quickly. First of all, what are your goals for the future as a composer, as a conductor, as a musician, and just anything you'd care to tell me? What do you see in the future?
I don't know what I see in the future. I don't know. We left the UK planning to come back, and that was not. We were planning to come back in 2020, so we didn't, and so our lives are kind of moved on here a little bit more. So I really don't know what's going to happen. But in terms of composing, I just want to write more. I want to write. I've got so many things that I think, I want to write that I haven't had time for up until now, because I've been doing a lot of research and research-related work, and yeah. So that's what I want to do. I want to spend the next few years really building up more things that I've written and finished and gotten out into the world. And I think that's really important, that pieces get out and go off and and find a life of their own with other people, and get interpreted by other people. I hate conducting my own stuff because I feel like it's the final piece is somebody else's thoughts, not mine. I will if I have to, kind of thing, in rehearsal or workshop, but it's that it really needs somebody else to come in and pick it up and run with it. So that's kind of where I am. And I mentioned earlier I've got small children, so at the moment I'm not really doing much conducting. I'm sort of saying no to conducting, and I'm doing a bit of teaching and coaching, but I'm focusing on composing while I'm sort of busy at home. It's great as a musician, I think, to have that flexibility, to have periods when you have a really high pressure, high intensity position, and then other times when I'm sort of filling my week very amply with creative things to do, but not necessarily having to go out all the time and be up late and do all of those things. So that's kind of where I am and where I'm going.
And I have one last question. It's just a tiny little thing, but you were a Bye Fellow at Fitzwilliam, Cambridge. What is a Bye Fellow?
So every college in Oxbridge has a different system of fellowships, and every fellowship just means you're part of the senior common room. So you're kind of part of the senior common room. You're part of the sort of, I don't know how to explain it to somebody. I mean, I'm sure you understand, but there might be people listening who basically are kind of like the teachers of the college and the researchers rather than the students, if that makes sense, or the staff who actually run the college, make everything happen. And every college, I discovered once I was there, because I had no idea before I was there, every college has a different system, and they'll have different types of fellows, and there'll be lots of fellows, and then there'll be honorary fellows and Bye Fellows, and other colleges have other life fellows, and other colleges have different names for them, different something fellows. And at Fitz, it just was the case that was what the director of music was. They were a Bye Fellow, which meant I didn't vote in the governor's meeting. I didn't have to go either. I had to write a report for them, but didn't have to go. So that was the difference that it made. It didn't make a big difference, but it was an important kind of part of the culture of the college. So it's really fascinating when you look up who's what kind of fellow at different colleges, and you start to get. And I remember in my first year thinking, do I need to know what all of these? Do I need to know that this person? Some of the directors of music are not fellows at all, and I was like, does that mean something? Should I? What's going on? And it means nothing. It's just the different ways that different colleges run the director of music. Oh, where does that S go? Directors of music, the DOMs, the different ways they run it. But yeah, it's absolutely fascinating. A brilliant place. I felt very odd being there. I grew up in Australia and Sunderland in the UK, neither of which could be further from Oxbridge in some ways. Neither of which prepared me in the slightest. Growing up in Roker in Sunderland did not prepare me for Cambridge in that way. Although I met lots of people who were from the northeast and from Sunderland and places like that. Even in my college, it's a small college, so it's not to say that there isn't a journey there. But yeah, the terminology still. That's still getting to grips with that, if I'm honest.
I'm wondering if perhaps the word "bye" just because sometimes in competitions and tournaments and things, if you get seeded into the next round, you're given a bye, and I'm thinking, perhaps the linguistic connection. Well, Katharine, it's absolutely a wonderful pleasure to speak with you, and I'm really honoured to have you as my guest composer for October, and to have the opportunity to share your music on my website and on my Twitter channel and elsewhere. And I've really enjoyed speaking to you, and I've learned a lot from this interview, and I sincerely hope that everybody viewing this will enjoy it as well. So thank you ever so much for your time, and I look forward to hearing more of your wonderful music, and bless you for motherhood and everything that you're doing. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you. It's been an utter privilege talking to you. Thank you very much for your kind words.
Not at all. Thank you. Okay, bye now.
Bye.